He returned home for lunch and found 4 children eating at his dead wife's table. They had his face. They called another woman mother. And she was a Christian he paid to clean his floors. What would you do if your blood was raised in secret under your own roof? By someone your faith taught you not to trust. Before you judge, before you choose sides, understand this story is not about comfort. It is about humiliation. It is about power. It is about who has the right to shape a child's soul. Subscribe if you believe stories should confront, not flatter. Comment if dignity still matters to you. This is not fiction meant to soothe you. It is meant to test you. Farid Rahmani pushed the dining room door open and stopped like a man hit with a verdict. The main table was alive. Plates. Bread torn by small hands. 4 boys sat in a row, same jaw, same eyes, same stubborn tilt of the chin. Across from them stood Marta, the housekeeper, a Christian woman who usually kept her gaze low and her steps quiet. That table had been sealed since Farid buried his wife. No lunches. No voices. No permission. Marta lifted a spoon to the nearest child and froze when Farid's shadow cut the light. The boys kept eating, trained by habit, not fear. One of them looked up, studied Farid's face with blunt curiosity, then returned to chewing as if the stranger had no authority in that room. Farid's throat tightened. Islam had shaped Farid's discipline, his household rules, his sense of purity and honor. Marta's cross had always been visible at the neckline of her uniform, a small declaration Farid tolerated because the woman worked hard and never crossed lines. The line was crossed now. Farid closed the door behind him with control, not kindness. Who gave permission for this table? The voice came out steady, but the hand at his side tightened until the knuckles lost color. Marta swallowed. No one gave permission, sir. Farid stepped closer. Then why is it happening? Marta faced the question without pleading. Because the children needed to eat. Farid's eyes cut to the boys again. 4 faces. 4 copies. The resemblance was not vague. Biology shouted. Farid had built companies on numbers and patterns. Denial had no place to hide. Marta wiped her palm on her apron, then spoke like someone choosing truth over safety. They are yours. Farid's jaw locked. That is impossible. Marta did not soften the statement. 4 years ago, after the memorial dinner for your wife's mother, you drank too much. You were alone. You were grieving. My sister was here that week, helping me. She fell into the same loneliness. She regretted it the next morning. She begged me to protect the children when illness took her. Farid's breath turned shallow. The mind reached for prayer, for structure, for the rules that kept a man intact. The room offered none. You hid this inside my house, Farid said, each word a controlled strike. A Christian hid my blood inside my walls. Marta's chin lifted. The gesture was small, but it refused humiliation. A Christian kept them alive, Marta said. A Christian fed them when no one else would. A Christian stayed when fear said to run. Farid's eyes narrowed. Do not preach to me under my roof. Marta did not retreat. No preaching, sir. Only facts. Your sons cried for a father they never met. Your money paid for the roof, yes. My hands paid for the nights. Farid's lips pressed into a hard line. Those children should have been brought to me. Immediately. Under my faith. Under my name. Marta's voice shook for the first time, not from guilt, from exhaustion. And then what? You would have sent them away to protect reputation. You would have erased my sister to protect honor. One of the boys wiped his mouth with the back of his hand and spoke without permission. Aunt Marta said a man who lies is weak. The child's tone carried no insult, only a rule learned like multiplication. Farid stared at the boy, then at Marta. The insult landed anyway. Farid's pride rose first, fast and sharp. Farid's grief followed, slower, heavier. Farid's heart, unused to being challenged by children, hit the bottom of the chest like a stone. Marta did not smile. Marta did not apologize. Marta only held the spoon again, refusing to beg. Farid stood at the head of the table that had belonged to the dead and asked a question that tasted like betrayal. How much disrespect should a man swallow before dignity becomes surrender? Farid did not raise his voice. He lowered it. The tone people used before contracts were broken and lives rearranged. Those children will leave this table. Marta did not move. The boys kept eating. One dropped bread. Marta picked it up, brushed it once, placed it back on the plate. The gesture was slow, defiant in its calm. They finish their meal, Marta said. Then they go to the room. Farid's mouth tightened. You do not issue schedules in my house. Marta met his stare. I do when hunger is involved. Farid stepped closer until the edge of the table pressed into his legs. You hid 4 heirs. You lied by silence. You used my property to build a secret life. Marta answered without lowering her eyes. I used your kitchen. I used your soap. I used your empty rooms. I did not use your name. I did not touch your money for them. I cleaned offices at night. I sold my wedding ring. I paid doctors in cash. Her fingers shook, then steadied. That is not theft. That is survival. Farid turned to the boys. Do you know who I am? The tallest shrugged. The owner. Another said, You don't like noise. The third said nothing. The fourth watched Marta, waiting for permission to breathe. Farid felt the words strike deeper than insults. Owner. Not father. Marta placed her hand on the table. Flat. Claiming space. They know who keeps them safe. Farid answered, cold. Safety is not the same as authority. Marta replied, sharp. And authority is not love. Farid straightened his jacket. The gesture rebuilt hierarchy. This ends today. You will provide documents, birth records, medical files, everything. I will transfer them to a proper household. Marta's throat worked. They already have one. Farid shook his head once. Not under Christian rules. Not under secrecy. Not under a woman who decided God gave her ownership over my blood. Marta's voice cracked but did not bend. God gave me duty. Your blood was already abandoned when your grief chose silence. The room tightened. One boy began to cry without sound. Tears slid. No noise. Training learned early. Farid saw it. Refused to acknowledge it. You exploited my weakness, Farid said. You built a family on my mistake. Marta stepped closer. Not touching him. Close enough to deny distance. You built loneliness on your pride. I filled the space with children who did not ask to be born. Farid pulled out his phone. I will call my lawyer. Marta nodded once. Call. The word landed without fear. I will call the church. They know the doctor. They know the nurse. They know the burial of my sister. Farid's eyes hardened. You involved outsiders. Marta answered, quiet. I involved witnesses. Farid turned away from the table for the first time. His reflection stared back from the dark glass of a cabinet. A man respected in mosques. A donor. A disciplined widower. Now a father of 4 hidden sons raised by a Christian cleaner. The image did not fit any prayer he knew. Behind him, Marta spoke again. They stay in this house. Farid answered without turning. No. Marta's hands closed into fists. Then you will drag them. Farid faced her. If I must. Marta shook her head slowly. You will have to drag me first. The boys watched. 4 small judges. No shouting. No drama. Only a line drawn across the floor that could not be unseen. Farid called his lawyer before sunset. No shouting. No threats. Only instructions. Documents. Custody. Emergency motion. The voice on the other end said yes too quickly. Power liked to be used. Farid ended the call and returned to the kitchen door. Marta was washing plates. The boys sat on the floor with notebooks. Silent lines. Discipline learned without orders. They will be transferred tomorrow, Farid said. Marta did not turn. No. One word. No apology. Farid folded his arms. You misunderstand your position. Marta dried her hands. Faced him. I understand it well. I clean your floors. I fold your shirts. I buried my sister with borrowed money. I raised 4 sons with cracked hands. I understand where I stand. Farid stepped closer. Then stand aside. Marta shook her head. This house is yours. Their lives are not. Farid exhaled through his nose. Controlled. Sharp. You live under my roof. Marta nodded. Yes. You eat my food. Yes. You survive because I allow you to work here. Yes. Farid leaned forward. Then you obey. Marta answered at once. No. Silence pressed into the room. The boys looked up. One dropped his pencil. No one moved to pick it up. Farid straightened. I am offering order. Education. Security. A future without shame. Marta crossed her arms. You are offering erasure. You raised them in lies. I raised them in truth. Their mother died. Their father vanished. God remained. Farid's jaw tightened. Do not bring your God into this. Marta stepped forward. One step only. Your God sees contracts. Mine sees children shaking at night. Farid looked past her, at the boys. You taught them to distrust me. I taught them to survive strangers. I am their father. You are their blood. Farid corrected, cold. Blood commands. Marta answered, steady. Blood does not hold fevered heads at 3 in the morning. Farid felt heat rise into his neck. You will lose this job. Marta nodded. I expected that. You will lose this house. Yes. You will lose protection. Yes. Farid waited for her to beg. She did not. Instead, Marta walked to the boys. Knelt. Placed a hand on each shoulder. The gesture was slow. Public. Territorial. They stay with me. Farid spoke through clenched teeth. You have no legal right. Marta answered without looking at him. I have their trust. That is not law. It is stronger. Farid took out his phone again. Tomorrow you will receive notice. Marta stood. Tomorrow I will be here. Farid shook his head once. You will be gone. Marta finally showed fear. It passed quickly. Replaced by resolve. Then you will explain to 4 children why their mother disappeared twice. The words struck low. Farid's hand tightened around the phone. You weaponize pity, Farid said. I protect the weak, Marta answered. Farid turned away. The decision had been made. The house did not belong to her. The law did. And the law would remove what prayer refused to surrender. The notice landed at the service entrance before Marta finished praying. Thick paper. Cold language. It didn't call her a caretaker. It called her a risk. Temporary suspension. Eviction within 7 days. A custody petition filed that morning, dressed as moral repair, framed as concealment of heirs and psychological influence. Farid did not need to shout. He had learned that the system speaks louder than men. Marta read the pages twice, folded them once, and walked straight to the boys. She did not pretend it was a misunderstanding. They want to take you, she said, and the youngest asked the only question that mattered. Like Mama. Marta's throat tightened, but she refused tears as currency. Not today, she answered, then corrected herself before fear could. And if they try later, we don't lie. We stand. Farid didn't confront her in person. He sent human resources. The contract ended with formal politeness and a guard at her elbow, as if a mop could become a weapon. Marta collected her things without pleading. She returned home early with empty hands, and the boys understood before she spoke. "They fired you," the tallest said, with a flat certainty that came from living around adult hypocrisy. Marta tried to protect them from guilt and failed on the first attempt. "Not because of you," she started, then stopped, "because truth mattered more than comfort. Because I refused to trade you for peace." The youngest wrapped his arms around her waist, hard and wordless, and Marta held him like a promise that would not negotiate. The next strike came in numbers. Her account froze. The bank clerk avoided her eyes and repeated the script about investigation and unauthorized use of employer property, as if children were furniture moved without permission. Marta put receipts on the counter, proof of night work, proof of cash payments to clinics, proof that she had fed them with her own exhaustion. The clerk barely looked. The system was built to respect signatures, not sacrifice. Then the school called. A social worker waited in the office, polite enough to hurt, asking who bathed them, who disciplined them, what prayers they knew, which God they named. The boys answered without confusion. "Aunt Marta." "Jesus." The social worker wrote too quickly, collecting words like evidence, and Marta saw the trap. Truth could be turned into bias, and devotion could be labeled influence when money wanted control. That night Farid finally spoke to her face to face, not to negotiate, but to press his advantage. His voice stayed calm, the calm of a man used to obedience. "You are making this harder," he said. Marta's hands trembled, so she tucked them into her sleeves and refused to perform weakness. "You are making it cruel," she answered. He said she would lose, that she had no legal right, that the boys were young and would forget. Marta did not compete with his wealth. She competed with his emptiness. "They won't forget who stayed," she said, and when Farid tried to corner her with religion, Christian endurance, Christian suffering, she did not flinch. "Christ accepted the cross," she said, her voice low but sharp. "He did not accept lies. You don't get to call yourself honorable while you erase children to protect your name." Farid's eyes narrowed, not because she was loud, but because she was accurate. On the seventh day the system arrived at the gate with a clipboard and a neutral face, pretending neutrality was justice. The boys clung to Marta's clothes as if fabric could become a wall. The social worker told her she could not stop it, and Marta answered with a calm that made everyone uncomfortable. "Then you will step over me," she said, placing her body where documents wanted access. Farid's voice came through the intercom, controlled and humiliating on purpose. "Move." Marta did not turn. "Call the police," she said, and then spoke loudly enough for the boys to hear, because dignity had to be witnessed. "I am who stayed." The social worker hesitated, not from mercy, but from fear of complications, because paperwork hates scenes. Farid felt irritation crack his control. This was not efficient. It was messy. And in the middle of that mess, the first real fracture appeared. A hospital record resurfaced with a wrong stamp, an altered entry, a quiet manipulation from years ago meant to protect Farid's reputation by burying the births. The system paused, then shifted its gaze. For the first time, it didn't look at Farid as the owner. It looked at him as the man who might have already broken the rules he now demanded others obey. The police did not arrive with urgency. They arrived with folders. 2 officers stood at the gate asking for hospital names, dates, and the identity of a former assistant who had worked for Farid during the year his wife died. The questions were polite, structured, almost gentle, but their order betrayed purpose. Farid listened from the corridor, posture intact, face disciplined, while something unfamiliar crept into his chest. Uncertainty. Not fear of punishment, but fear of narrative. The system he trusted had turned its body slightly, no longer facing Marta as the problem, but facing the architecture of his own silence. Marta remained beside the boys, one hand resting on each narrow shoulder, not clinging, not dramatic, simply anchoring them to the only certainty they had ever known. Truth did not erupt. It accumulated. A birth registry with altered entries surfaced first, filed under the assistant's name instead of Farid's. Then a hospital receipt, paid in cash, recorded 2 weeks after the births. Then a donation routed through one of Farid's foundations, labeled as support for grieving mothers, sent to the same hospital wing where Marta's sister had delivered the boys. The pattern did not scream crime. It whispered avoidance. It was not the language of prisons. It was the language of reputation management. When the officers finally asked why the children had never been declared, Farid spoke of medication, of grief, of decisions made by staff, of memory gaps softened by tragedy. The explanation was polished. It had been rehearsed unconsciously for years. But silence slipped through its seams. The kind that forms when truth refuses to kneel. Marta heard it from the doorway. She did not interrupt. She did not accuse. She let the absence of answers stand where lies had once worked. 2 days later, the social worker returned. Not with authority sharpened, but dulled. The papers in her hand were thinner now. Temporary guardianship would remain with Marta pending investigation. The tone was careful, almost apologetic, as if professionalism could be stitched back together after wearing injustice. Farid nodded, slow, restrained, his mouth shaped into acceptance without consent. The system did not apologize. It adjusted. Marta closed the door after the woman left and stood there longer than necessary, breathing against wood, shoulders tight, heart refusing celebration. Relief came late and weak. Fear arrived first. Fear did not need permission to remain. It lived where certainty had once been threatened. The boys did not ask questions. They watched her face instead, learning from the movement of her jaw whether the world was safe enough to blink. That evening Farid asked to see them. Alone. Not through lawyers. Not through staff. Through his voice. The request was formal, but thin, stripped of command. Marta studied him before answering. She searched his posture for ownership and found something less organized. Regret, perhaps. Or pride learning its new shape. She allowed the meeting but named its condition. They speak truth, she said. Do not punish it. Farid nodded, as if obedience were a temporary language he was willing to borrow. He sat with them in the smaller living room he had never used, shoulders squared like a guest in his own property. He said their names slowly, repeating syllables until they stayed still on his tongue. The tallest answered his questions without warmth or defiance. The second watched the floor. The third examined Farid's hands as if searching for a story inside them. The youngest stayed near the door, positioned between escape and loyalty, eyes fixed on where Marta stood beyond the frame. Farid spoke of schools, of opportunity, of inheritance. The boys listened as children listen to weather forecasts. Distant. Abstract. He did not speak of absence. He did not speak of their mother. When he left, the room did not follow him. Marta watched his back narrow into the corridor, posture folding into something unfamiliar. A man shrinking inside his own territory. She did not call him back. She did not offer comfort. She offered silence, the same silence he had once used to protect his name. That night Marta washed dishes long after they were clean. Her hands moved automatically while her mind replayed years of careful hiding, years of choosing humility over visibility, years of telling herself that safety was more important than recognition. She had never asked for gratitude. She had only asked for time. Now time had answered with exposure. Not the kind that celebrates sacrifice, but the kind that drags it into rooms where power pretends neutrality. In church the following morning, Marta did not pray for justice anymore. Justice had already arrived disguised as procedure and reluctant correction. She prayed for endurance. Endurance to raise 4 boys whose blood carried a man who once tried to remove them with signatures. Endurance to explain one day why dignity is sometimes defended with silence and sometimes with refusal. Endurance to remain Christian in a house where her faith had been labeled weakness, then inconvenience, then threat. Farid returned to his routines. Meetings. Calls. Donations. The mosque. Public composure remained intact, but something beneath it shifted. Authority now required explanation. Respect required context. Whispers did not accuse, but they circulated. A man could lose power without losing money. That discovery unsettled him more than any court notice. At night he stood alone in the unused dining room, staring at the table that had once been forbidden, now reclaimed by small fingerprints and unfinished bread. He did not sit. Ownership had not prepared him for belonging. Marta tucked the boys into bed that night as she always had. The youngest asked if the man would come again. She did not lie. Yes. The child nodded, absorbing inevitability like a rule of gravity. Marta kissed his forehead, then each of the others, the gesture identical, fair, unranked. When she turned off the light, her hands shook. Not from fear of losing them now, but from understanding what it had cost to keep them. Faith had not shielded her from humiliation. It had trained her to endure it without selling what mattered. And for the first time since Farid had opened that dining room door, the territory of the house felt divided not by walls or ownership papers, but by allegiance. One side held power. The other held the children. Marta remained where she had always stood, between them. The change did not arrive with sirens or public statements. It entered through silence where invitations used to be. Farid noticed it first in his calendar. 3 meetings postponed without new dates. A charity dinner rescheduled indefinitely. A mosque committee member who usually returned calls within minutes now replied with formal delay, careful language, polite distance. Nothing accused him. Nothing defended him. Reputation does not collapse. It loosens. It becomes conditional. Farid felt it in rooms where conversations lowered their volume when he approached, then resumed with forced warmth. The system had not convicted him, but it had adjusted its posture again, this time away from certainty. The investigation advanced in careful steps, slow enough to appear respectful, thorough enough to become public. A civil inquiry into falsified records. A review of donations linked to the hospital. Interviews with the former assistant, who did not deny altering documents, only explained why. I was told it protected him, she said. His grief. His image. His standing in the community. The words traveled through administrative channels before reaching the press in diluted form, stripped of drama, rich in implication. No scandal headline. Just the phrase, undisclosed paternity, repeated across financial pages and legal bulletins. Farid read his own name inside those sentences like a stranger reading a diagnosis. He requested a private meeting with Marta. Not in the kitchen. Not in the corridor. In the same small living room where he had spoken to the boys. He waited standing. She entered slowly, posture guarded, face neutral, hands folded low, as if calm were armor that did not shine. Farid spoke first, abandoning ceremony. I did not plan this. Marta answered, quiet. Plans do not change results. He said the assistant acted without direct instruction. She did not argue. Authority does not need to give detailed orders to be obeyed. The sentence landed clean. No accusation. Only structure. Farid swallowed. I was protecting my wife's memory. Marta lifted her eyes. You were protecting your position. Silence filled the space between them, thick but not violent. Farid's voice dropped. They are my sons. Marta nodded. Yes. Then I deserve a place. Marta held his gaze. Deserve is a word for wages. Not for children. The court session was brief. Civil, restrained, almost dull to anyone who expected spectacle. The ruling addressed documentation fraud, financial misrepresentation, and failure to declare dependents. The penalty was not imprisonment. It was disclosure. A heavy fine. Mandatory public correction of records. Formal acknowledgement of paternity. Supervised visitation rights. The language was clean. Legal. Permanent. Farid signed where instructed. His signature looked the same as it always had. Only the hand beneath it felt unfamiliar, less certain, less sovereign. News spread quietly. Investors asked questions. Religious leaders avoided answers. Donations paused. No one said his name with contempt. That would have been easier. They said it with caution. Respect now required explanation, and explanation weakens authority. Farid returned home that evening without entourage or calls. The mansion received him without ceremony. Inside, the boys were eating at the once forbidden table. Marta stood beside them, correcting posture, passing bread, touching shoulders when voices rose too fast. She did not look at Farid when he entered. She did not challenge him. Restoration did not need permission. He stood at the edge of the room longer than necessary. Ownership no longer guaranteed entry into moments. One boy noticed him first. Then another. No one spoke. Marta finally turned. Their eyes met. No victory. No apology. Only acknowledgement of a boundary that had been tested and rewritten. Farid nodded once, small, uncertain. Marta returned to the table. That night, Farid sat alone in his study, documents stacked in front of him like proof of survival rather than power. He recited his prayers out of habit, but the words no longer arranged his thoughts into certainty. Faith still existed, but it no longer sat above consequence. He understood, too late, that territory could be purchased, defended, inherited, but dignity was different. Dignity had chosen a woman who cleaned floors, raised 4 abandoned children, and refused to exchange them for safety. And in that recognition, the judgment became complete. The change did not arrive with sirens or public statements. It entered through silence where invitations used to be. Farid noticed it first in his calendar. 3 meetings postponed without new dates. A charity dinner, rescheduled indefinitely. A mosque committee member who usually returned calls within minutes now replied with formal delay, careful language, polite distance. Nothing accused him. Nothing defended him. Reputation does not collapse. It loosens. It becomes conditional. Farid felt it in rooms where conversations lowered their volume when he approached, then resumed with forced warmth. The system had not convicted him, but it had adjusted its posture again, this time away from certainty. The investigation advanced in careful steps, slow enough to appear respectful, thorough enough to become public. A civil inquiry into falsified records. A review of donations linked to the hospital. Interviews with the former assistant, who did not deny altering documents, only explained why. "I was told it protected him," she said. His grief. His image. His standing in the community. The words traveled through administrative channels before reaching the press in diluted form, stripped of drama, rich in implication. No scandal headline. Just the phrase, undisclosed paternity, repeated across financial pages and legal bulletins. Farid read his own name inside those sentences like a stranger reading a diagnosis. He requested a private meeting with Marta. Not in the kitchen. Not in the corridor. In the same small living room where he had spoken to the boys. He waited standing. She entered slowly, posture guarded, face neutral, hands folded low, as if calm were armor that did not shine. Farid spoke first, abandoning ceremony. "I did not plan this." Marta answered, quiet. "Plans do not change results." He said the assistant acted without direct instruction. She did not argue. Authority does not need to give detailed orders to be obeyed. The sentence landed clean. No accusation. Only structure. Farid swallowed. "I was protecting my wife's memory." Marta lifted her eyes. "You were protecting your position." Silence filled the space between them, thick but not violent. Farid's voice dropped. "They are my sons." Marta nodded. "Yes." "Then I deserve a place." Marta held his gaze. Deserve is a word for wages. Not for children. The court session was brief. Civil, restrained, almost dull to anyone who expected spectacle. The ruling addressed documentation fraud, financial misrepresentation, and failure to declare dependents. The penalty was not imprisonment. It was disclosure. A heavy fine. Mandatory public correction of records. Formal acknowledgement of paternity. Supervised visitation rights. The language was clean. Legal. Permanent. Farid signed where instructed. His signature looked the same as it always had. Only the hand beneath it felt unfamiliar, less certain, less sovereign. News spread quietly. Investors asked questions. Religious leaders avoided answers. Donations paused. No one said his name with contempt. That would have been easier. They said it with caution. Respect now required explanation, and explanation weakens authority. Farid returned home that evening without entourage or calls. The mansion received him without ceremony. Inside, the boys were eating at the once forbidden table. Marta stood beside them, correcting posture, passing bread, touching shoulders when voices rose too fast. She did not look at Farid when he entered. She did not challenge him. Restoration did not need permission. He stood at the edge of the room longer than necessary. Ownership no longer guaranteed entry into moments. One boy noticed him first. Then another. No one spoke. Marta finally turned. Their eyes met. No victory. No apology. Only acknowledgement of a boundary that had been tested and rewritten. Farid nodded once, small, uncertain. Marta returned to the table. That night, Farid sat alone in his study, documents stacked in front of him like proof of survival rather than power. He recited his prayers out of habit, but the words no longer arranged his thoughts into certainty. Faith still existed, but it no longer sat above consequence. He understood, too late, that territory could be purchased, defended, inherited, but dignity was different. Dignity had chosen a woman who cleaned floors, raised 4 abandoned children, and refused to exchange them for safety. And in that recognition, the judgment became complete. Continue with the next chapter 7. We are going to have 9 in total, not 8. Chapter 7. The house reordered. The house did not change its walls, but it changed its rules. That was how Marta felt at first. Not in architecture, not in furniture, but in permission. The boys no longer waited for footsteps before speaking. They argued over bread, over notebooks, over whose turn it was to wash dishes, small conflicts that belonged to children who no longer believed disappearance was a daily possibility. Marta corrected them with the same firm patience she always had, but now her voice carried weight that did not borrow authority from employment. Came from recognition. Temporary, legal, fragile, but real. Farid moved through the mansion like a guest who knew the price of being seen too much. He did not issue new orders. He did not remove old ones. He adjusted his distance. Pride demanded separation. Reality enforced it. His name remained on the deeds. His power remained in accounts. Yet every room that contained the boys resisted ownership. He began to understand that control was no longer total when it had to be negotiated with memory and trust. The first supervised visit took place on a Sunday afternoon. No cameras. No staff. A neutral observer sat near the door, pretending not to hear every word. Farid brought books in Persian, educational toys chosen by an assistant who did not know their names. The boys accepted them with courtesy learned from Marta, not gratitude. They answered questions carefully, measuring tone more than content. Farid tried to speak of heritage, of culture, of faith, but the words met a wall built from years of absence. One of them finally asked, without anger, "Why didn't you come before?" The room waited. Farid searched for language strong enough to stand without excuses. He found none. "I was wrong," he said. The words were thin. Still, they stood. Marta observed from the corridor, not from suspicion, but from duty. She had promised their mother protection, not isolation. She did not poison them against their father. She did not prepare them to love him either. She prepared them to see truth without fear. When the visit ended, the boys returned to her side without hesitation. Farid did not protest. That silence was new. It was not surrender. It was learning the weight of limits. Outside the house, consequences continued their quiet work. Invitations did not return. Donations were accepted with formal gratitude, not warmth. Business partners requested additional assurances, additional audits, additional distance. Farid remained wealthy, influential, protected by structures that respected money more than morality, but the effortless dominance he once carried dissolved into procedure. He had not been exiled. He had been reduced. That reduction hurt more than punishment. One evening, he found Marta in the kitchen, writing figures into a notebook. Expenses. Food. School supplies. Clinic visits. The arithmetic of survival, not comfort. He watched her for a moment before speaking. You could have taken money, he said. You still can. Marta closed the notebook. They are not debts. Farid lowered his voice. You saved my sons. Marta met his eyes. I raised them. Saving is brief. Raising is daily. Farid hesitated, then said what pride resisted. You did what I did not. Marta answered without triumph. You can still choose who you become to them. The words did not absolve him. They challenged him. For the first time, fatherhood was presented not as a right to reclaim, but as a discipline to learn. That night, the boys ate at the table without looking toward the door. Marta sat with them. Farid remained in his study. The house functioned without him at its center. That realization cut deeper than any legal penalty. Ownership had lost its throne. And for the first time since grief had hardened him into silence, Farid felt something unfamiliar press against his ribs. Not anger. Not humiliation. Displacement. Farid discovered that distance, once learned, becomes difficult to unlearn. Days passed in the same house, under the same roof, and still he measured his steps, his words, his right to be present. The boys no longer froze when they heard his voice, but they did not seek it either. They lived as if the house had reorganized itself around a different gravity. Marta's routines marked the hours now. School schedules on the wall, grocery lists on the counter, quiet prayers before sleep. Order remained, but it no longer carried his signature. The board of his main company requested a private meeting. Not urgent. Not confrontational. Careful. They spoke of stability and public confidence. They spoke of long-term planning and the benefit of simplifying personal narratives. One man suggested that transferring full custody to Farid, publicly and decisively, would restore clarity. A single household. A single authority. A single faith. It would look strong, the man said. Farid understood the translation. Remove the Christian woman. Reclaim the children. Rewrite the story into something clean enough for investors and community leaders to accept without discomfort. That evening, Farid sat alone in the unused dining room. The forbidden table stood in front of him, still marked by shallow scratches from small hands, crumbs wedged into it seems like evidence of a life that had ignored his mourning. He imagined it empty again. Quiet again. Orderly. He imagined his sons eating elsewhere, supervised by tutors, speaking carefully, learning to honor him without confusion. He imagined Marta leaving with one suitcase, dignity intact but distant, her role reduced to a paragraph in legal documents. The vision brought calm, the kind that comes from symmetry, from control. Then he imagined the youngest boy's hand tightening around Marta's sleeve at night. The third boy watching hands instead of faces to learn who was safe. The tallest correcting his brothers when their voices rose too loudly, already practicing the art of shrinking to avoid punishment. Farid recognized the pattern too late. It was the same discipline he had learned as a child. Silence as protection. Obedience as shelter. A faith built on fear, not devotion. He went to the kitchen after midnight. Marta was there, folding laundry. The gesture was small. Endless. The board wants the children to live with me, Farid said. No preface. No threat. Marta did not stop folding. I know. He frowned. How? She answered. Power always speaks in patterns. Farid sat across from her. For the first time, not as owner. As a man unsure of his next sentence. If they come with me, he said, they will have everything. Marta placed a shirt on the table. Smoothed it once. They already do. He resisted the answer. They will be raised in my faith. Marta lifted her eyes. Faith that is forced becomes performance. His voice tightened. And yours? Marta's tone remained steady. Mine taught me to stay when leaving would be easier. Farid leaned back. You would refuse money again. Marta nodded. Yes. You would refuse safety. I would refuse ownership disguised as care. Farid looked at the folded clothes. You do not fear losing them. Marta shook her head slowly. I fear becoming someone who trades them. The words closed the room. Not violently. Permanently. The next morning, Farid called the board. He declined their proposal. He said custody would remain shared. Marta would remain primary guardian. The children would choose where to sleep. The board member paused too long before answering. Respect shifted again. Not downward. Sideways. Conditional. Expensive. Farid then went to the small living room where the boys sat drawing. He did not bring gifts. He did not bring rules. He knelt to their height. You will stay here, he said. With her. One of them asked. You won't be angry? Farid answered truthfully. I will learn not to be. Marta watched from the doorway. She did not interfere. She did not bless the moment. She allowed it to exist. That night, Farid prayed differently. Not for control. Not for restoration of reputation. He prayed for the strength to remain smaller than his pride. It was the first prayer that did not place him at the center of its request. The house did not celebrate. It simply continued. And in that continuation, the choice became real. Time did not heal the house. It reorganized it. The boys grew into their limbs in uneven stages, voices breaking without warning, arguments rising over nothing and ending in exhausted laughter. Their presence became permanent in ways ownership never could. Shoes by the door. School papers on the table. Bread disappearing too fast. Marta remained the axis of these small certainties. She did not lead with authority. She led with repetition. Wake up. Wash hands. Speak clearly. Tell the truth even when it costs comfort. Pray before sleep, not to demand answers, but to recognize limits. Christianity, in her practice, was not a banner. It was endurance made routine. Farid entered their lives the way a man learns a new language. Slowly, with mistakes that could not be erased. He stopped trying to impress them with plans or promises. He attended parent meetings without speaking first. He listened when they complained about teachers. He learned which one hated eggs, which one pretended not to be afraid of storms, which one watched adults too closely because disappointment had trained his eyes. When they asked about their mother, he did not shorten her story anymore. He said her name. He said her weakness. He said her kindness. When they asked why he had stayed away so long, he did not blame grief. He said, I chose silence. It was wrong. The words never became easy. They became necessary. The community never repaired him fully. Invitations returned slowly, changed in tone. Some respect remained withheld, replaced by politeness that kept distance. Farid learned to accept this as consequence rather than injustice. Wealth stayed. Influence remained. The illusion of moral insulation disappeared. When religious leaders spoke of responsibility, he listened without adjusting the message to his comfort. When businessmen hinted that reclaiming full custody would simplify his image, he declined without explaining. His power still existed. It simply no longer decided everything. Marta never asked him to become Christian. She never defended her faith as superior in speech. She defended it through refusal. Refusal to sell peace. Refusal to accept quiet injustice. Refusal to teach the boys that obedience was the same as goodness. When they fought, she corrected them without humiliation. When they lied, she did not shout. She waited until shame did its work, then demanded repair. Truth first, she always said. Then forgiveness. The order never changed. Years passed. The boys argued about universities, about names, about whether faith should be inherited or chosen. One said he believed in God. Another said he believed in discipline. Another said he believed in loyalty. Marta listened to all of it without fear. Faith that required control, she believed, was already weak. One night, after an argument about leaving home, one of them asked her what she would leave them when she died. The question was careless, young, unguarded. Marta did not answer quickly. She finished washing the cups. She dried her hands. She sat down. "I will not leave you property," she said. "I will not leave you money. I will leave you a habit. When power asks for silence, stand. When comfort asks for betrayal, refuse. When fear tells you to hide, remember who stayed with you when hiding was easier." They mocked her seriousness, embarrassed by affection they had not learned to name. But they listened. Children always do, even when pretending not to. Farid heard the conversation from the corridor. He did not enter. He did not interrupt. He recognized the boundary that could not be purchased. Blood had given him connection. Marta had given them shape. Later, when the house slept, Farid stood alone near the dining table that had once been forbidden. The surface still carried marks from years of use. Scratches from homework. Heat stains from careless cups. Evidence of disorder that no longer frightened him. He understood then that legacy was not built through control or correction, but through restraint. Through choosing not to remove what challenged pride. In the end, the inheritance did not belong to courts, contracts, or lineage. It belonged to 4 boys who learned that dignity is not loud. It stands. And to the woman who taught them how. If this story touched you, it is because conflicts like this do not live in fiction alone. They live in houses. In families. In quiet choices that no one applauds. Marta had no power. No title. No protection. Only faith, endurance, and the courage to stand when silence was cheaper. Stories like this survive only when they are shared. Subscribe to continue reading narratives about dignity, faith, and real human conflict. Comment with your thoughts, disagreement, reflection, or silence broken into words. Your voice keeps stories like this alive.